Hey, it's Joshua Gar from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And every photo and video you're seeing in this camera shootout was taken on the cameras of the HTC One M9. Let's start off with some of the better to pretty good results that the HTC One M9 was able to make in my travels to San Francisco and then to the Hollywood sign. There are going to be a lot of photos here that you're seeing in the beginning of this video in full broad daylight. Now, these are obviously going to be the most ideal situations for you to use the HTC One M9 as well as other cameras as well, but this is definitely where you're going to see some of the best photos that this camera can make. From there, I should tell you that I'm taking all of these photos at the full resolution at 20 megapixels. And as you can see, the coloration is quite good. It might not be quite as saturated as plenty of the other players in the Android game, but nonetheless, you'll see these photos have a very large size to them, and then you'll see the 100 crops as you're already seeing for plenty of the photos in here. As a companion out on daily drives, you'll find that the HTC One M9 is not a hard camera to use, especially when you have that interface that swipes up and down from the different modes. However, certain aspects of the camera app are a little bit fidgety, especially when you're trying to trigger things like the HDR mode. You have to go through a few different presses in order to even activate it, and then do the same number of presses if you want to turn it off for particular photos. But the HDR samples are going to come up a little bit later in this video, and I'll show you how it sort of mitigates the exposure issues that happens in the camera app, but at the same time the HDR mode is maybe a little bit hit and miss as well. But nonetheless, here we are doing the hike on the Hollywood Hills. I got a couple lovely dogs here to take some photos and some videos of, and really all of these photos are quite nice, definitely usable in all different situations, especially in social media. This particular photo right here, as you'll see in the 100 crop, is a little bit blurry, and the main reason why is because I had to zoom in order to get this particular shot of the Griffith Observatory. And the same went for this particular shot of the Hollywood sign, where I zoomed in using the camera app, and then you can see even more grain because that digital zoom doesn't do the photo many favors. And of course, ending this particular segment with a lovely Tesla Model S. Now, without OIS in the pictures, you might have to try a few different times in order to get your photo right because the stabilization's not there. However, you see it the most in videos. You have to keep yourself pretty steady in order to get a nice, steady, and very good video. And in plenty of situations where maybe you're going handheld while walking, it's not the most ideal situation. But now here's where I get into some of those exposure issues that I told you about earlier. Now, since the camera app in the HTC One M9 focuses on spot metering, you have to find just the right spot in order to get the exposure that you want in the photo. Now, if you go into a dark area, the entire photo starts to get pretty light, and if you go into a light area, the whole photo starts to get a little bit dark. This is mostly true for situations where you would want to use HDR, as you're seeing here, in the comparison among different exposures, and then, like right here, the actual HDR shot. Now, the HDR shots do tend to add a little bit more color saturation, and it does even out the exposures in particular photos and situations, which is really great, but it's a mode that you're going to have to fidget to get to in the first place, which might not always be the ideal. Now, some of the different other modes that are available include the panorama shot, which here shows a pretty nice view of the urban lights at LACMA in LA. And then, of course, from the hike, you could see here that I did have a little bit of trouble in one particular section, so the lighting did get a little bit weird. Moving from left to right or right to left with the panorama can be a bit of a chore. The front-facing camera tends to be a highlight of the camera experience because it is of the ultra-pixel iteration. You now get the full ultra-pixel experience on the front-facing camera, so especially for indoor self-portraits, you'll get some pretty nice shots. And then, of course, you have all of the different effects that the HTC One M9 camera app puts in, like the face fusion, as you can see here, the face melding into another one and then going right back. You are able to put particle effects on a particular photo and then get a nice tiny little photo of it, as you can see right here. And finally, you are able to put two photos together with a number of different effects in order to meld the two together into one nice shot. Now, all of those effects are certainly very fun to use, and it is a crux of the camera experience on the HTC One M9, especially the Zoes, which do return and give you a nice way of kind of recapping a particular day, and you're going to see one at the end of this video. Unfortunately, my main gripe with the HTC One M9 camera, as you're going to see as I'm slowly getting into the indoor shots and then later into the low light shots, is that the camera itself and just its sheer picture quality is pretty uneven, especially when you take away prominent light sources and you get indoors, or you get even to shots during the night. You tend to see a lot more grain, and unfortunately there's a noise reduction that's going on here that really makes all the photos look really smudgy, and you're going to see that degradation as I slowly get into much lower light situations. Now, from what I can tell, the main reason why the HTC One M9 has trouble in low light shots is because it does two things typically in these situations. It ups the ISO to very high levels, which you can already see here adds a lot of grain to photos, and then it slows the shutter speed, which has a different problem attached to it. At slower shutter speeds, you have to keep your hands as steady as possible because there's a longer amount of time needed for the camera to bring in all of the light in order to get the proper exposure. Now, in those situations, you're going to end up having to take multiple shots, and for the most part, you're probably going to end up getting somewhat blurry photos because of the slow shutter speed. Now, what that means is that the HTC One M9 camera just happens to be pretty uneven. It is able to get some pretty great shots in very prominent light, but in even indoor situations, the grain just comes out, and the noise reduction that the camera app uses in its post-processing really doesn't do much to help the situation. And to end this video, since you guys liked it so much last time, I went ahead and put a lot of foodie pictures at the end of this so you can see how the M9 fares in that particular situation, which is really common for a lot of your users. Ultimately, the HTC One M9 is not a bad performer by any means. It is a very solid performer in the camera department, but unfortunately, there's one particular reason why I wouldn't use it all the time, and it's because I would prefer that the camera I have on me at all times, my phone, is a really good performer in pretty much any situation that I would throw at it. Now, the HTC One M9 does do some pretty great photos in broad daylight and in high level light shots, and even if the color saturation is a little bit lower, you can always bump that up in the settings. But once you go to the low light situations, that's when things really take a turn, and the noise reduction, the post-production, and really just the different choices that the HTC One M9 camera makes really don't make for a good low light level shooter. Many users have confirmed that if you go into the settings, you can tweak a number of the toggles in order to get better photos out of this camera. But for a out-of-the-box experience, you would really hope that the phone that you spend a lot of money on will be able to perform the way that you need it to. And unfortunately, with the HTC One M9, that's just not the experience that I had with it. As always, keep it tuned to Android Authority for even more coverage of the HTC One M9, including the review that you can see right over on the side. And also stay tuned for even more from the rest of us here at Android Authority, because we are your source for all things Android.